From the headquarters of Telesia English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. An increase in militarization in some parts of Colombia has been seriously affecting indigenous communities. The Inara people say the military oppression and deadly violence they face is nothing short of a humanitarian crisis.
Senior advisor of Nariño's Plural Indigenous National Assembly, Reader Pai, arrived in Bogota to report the humanitarian crisis taking place in the land of the Awa people. Last year alone, about 600 indigenous people were forced to flee their homes due to growing militarization and violence sweeping the already vulnerable community.
There have
been murders, threats to leaders, and lately there is militarization. This does not allow us to live in peace in our own land.
19 people have been murdered in the community. Several death threats were issued to councillors and key members of indigenous organizations. Indigenous communities say these incidents have been on the rise because of President Iván Duque's militarization policy.
There has been a larger public force in the zone with the Plan Orion, and we have the threat to establish 2 military bases close to the shelters or inside the shelters. Also, the troops have been chopping forests to make the helicopter tracks in the area.
Over 35,000 indigenous people from the municipalities of Ricaurte, Tumaco, Barbacoa, Samaniego, and Roberto Payán are now living in shelters.
The troops are stationed near the schools that are located near indigenous shelters and storage areas for vital supplies. Soldiers have stolen food, water, even chickens. It's all that these people have.
Community and human rights activists are condemning the growing militarization of indigenous areas and the resulting forced displacement.
Water contamination in the gorge, in the rivers, on educational institutions that don't have public bathrooms, and it's all on open field. Big part of water consumption are contaminated, and that is what causes diarrhea and acute respiratory infection.
This is causing death to indigenous children.
Many sick children are sent to city hospitals, but they don't make it out alive. Others are so undernourished that they suffer malnutrition.
Indigenous people say for far too long they've been oppressed and dispossessed by force beyond their control. And so, they're demanding action from government to ensure the preservation of their land, community, and lives.
Students are marching to Colombia's capital, Bogota, to take part in a huge demonstration called for November 28th to demand that the government increase the education budget. Our correspondent Paula Fernandez reports.
It's been 1 week since the dialogue between the government and the delegates from the 32 public universities in the country. Students continue to demand the government an increase in the budget for their institutions. Meanwhile, students from all over the country are marching towards the capital. On November 28, students are calling for a big demonstration that will be supported by different workers' unions, indigenous and campesino movements to reject the lack of resources for higher education and the new economic policies imposed by the government of President Iván Duque. Students from the Universidad del Cauca have denounced police repressions as they march to Bogota. They say they are just marching to demand a solution to the budget cuts and ask the government to end the policy brutality. Students from at least 3 public universities are already in Bogota and have demonstrated during this day in small gatherings. Student movements are still calling on President Iván Duque to join the dialogue to accompany his Minister of Education.
Human rights organizations in Colombia are calling on the government to honor the terms of the peace agreement signed in 2016. Around 400 social leaders gathered at the 10th National Human Rights Forum to discuss possible solutions to the social conflict. They warned of the potential dismantling of the system for reparations and justice, and they also condemned the persecution of former FARC members. And back in 2014, the government and the FARC announced a plan to solve the country's drug problem. Let's find out more in the third part of our series on Colombia's peace agreement.
The government wanted to get to the root of the problem, so they decided to take back land that's being used by drug traffickers. To do this, they pledged to consult people living in over 100 areas they wanted to target. The needs of the community were meant to be taken into account before they rolled out any measures, but the government have failed to do this.
Minister Emilio Archila was in charge of the post-conflict discussions. For 20 days, he called us to meet him at the presidential palace. But when we got there, he was not there. That makes us think they are taking the process as a joke. It's disrespectful to social leaders and to the peace agreement.
The expansion of illegal crops is directly linked to poverty and a lack of law enforcement by the government. Criminal organizations have capitalized on the situation, but campesinos still hope to get rid of them and illegal crops.
Organizations like COCAM and the Catatumbo Campesino Association have shown their willingness to move forward with the removal of illegal crops on their land, but the Colombian government is not helping.
According to reports, the removal of illegal crops has only progressed by 2%. All the while, campesinos are at the mercy of criminal gangs, leading to the death of 47 of their leaders.
The previous government promised to find a solution to illegal crops, but they didn't, and neither has the government of Iván Duque. The killing of our leaders continues.
According to the spokesperson of the Kroc Institute in Colombia, it's time to put an end to the criminalization and persecution of campesinos with the support of the government.
The challenge Colombia faces is to integrate solutions in order to stop these crimes. It has to be a step-by-step process that answers all concerns and issues.
The peace agreement was an innovative step. It gave hope, only to be dashed by the lack of commitment to it.
Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno has asked his entire cabinet of ministers to resign. The government has explained, though, that this is just part of the process of evaluating the minister's performance in office. After this evaluation process is completed by the end of the year, the president will make public his decision regarding his cabinet. U.S. troops deployed at the southern border crossing were busy prepping for the migrant caravan's arrival. But Central Americans working in search of a better life are still hoping to cross over into the United States.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said military personnel supporting Border Patrol south of the country can use lethal force if necessary against the more than 6,000 migrants arriving in the area. But his Defense Secretary James Mattis has denied these reports.
The President did see the need to back up the Border Patrol, and we received late last night an additional instruction authorizing to implement additional measures. We're sizing up what those are.
On Thanksgiving Day, the president also threatened to close the border as more migrants arrive to the border city of Tijuana in Mexico.
We find that it gets to a level where we are going to lose control or where people are going to start getting hurt. We will close entry into the country for a period of time until we can get it under control.
The entire border?
The whole border. I mean the whole border.
And the U.S. president made good on his promise. In fact, the military performed a drill in San Ysidro's port of entry. Migrants are afraid this latest move could bring their grueling 4,000-kilometer journey to an abrupt end, while also dashing any hopes for asylum.
We are afraid since we are traveling with my daughter. I don't want anything to happen to her.
Donald Trump wants to greet us with punches and bullets, but I know our faith in God will be stronger than Donald Trump.
I am not afraid. My goal was to arrive in the United States, and I'm close to achieving it.
According to the Washington Post, Donald Trump wants to implement a program to encourage migrants to stay in Mexico while their asylum requests are being processed. The plan could come into effect on November 23rd.
And a large group of migrants has marched towards the border in Tijuana to request asylum in the United States. The march started a couple of hours before the drills by U.S. troops. The various migrant caravans headed to the border are made up of about 7,000 people from Central America.
It's a way of telling Trump to get things underway as well. We've been lining up for asylum, but it's very slow. We can't spend months waiting for authorities to get moving and suffering.
What is missing is a flow of information so that migrants can see their options. If they want to cross the border, then they have to put their names on a list and be aware of the daily quota of people.
President Sebastian Pinera is visiting Temuco after the murder of the young Mapuche Camilo Catrayanca almost 10 days ago. Our correspondent in Chile, Thierry Valenzuela, has the details.
President Sebastián Piñera has arrived to Temuco 9 days after a Mapuche man, Camilo Catrillanca, was killed by police forces. He hasn't said much about what his agenda will be, but we know he has met with the governor of the region, Jorge Anton, who Piñera appointed after the previous one resigned because of these latest events. The police admitted recordings that could have clarified what happened to Catrillanca were destroyed. We also know the president met with the archbishop in the city of Angol. Meanwhile, in Mapuche territories, people are protesting against his visit. In Capital Santiago, students also protested, throwing red paint representing the violent oppression by security forces. Catrillanca was the 16th Mapuche killed by the police since the return to democracy.
We thank Thierry for that report. Now, dozens of people in Chile have gathered in front of the presidential palace holding up portraits of Catrillanca to protest his murder. Demonstrators held Catrillanca's portrait to their faces for 40 minutes in complete silence. The murder of the young Mapuche man at the hands of the police just over a week ago has sparked a wave of protests. This protest was organized by a group of artists and activists.
For anyone who wants to participate, the event involves holding up a portrait of Camilo Catrillanca up to your face, in front of the presidential palace, and facing that way because we believe those responsible for his death are in there.
And Interior Minister Andres Chadwick will be called to Congress to answer questions about Catrillanca's murder. With 61 votes, lawmakers approved a resolution that would allow questions to be posed to the minister. This is to take place during a lower house session on December 11th. The opposition says it hopes this will serve to publicly clarify the police's role in the murder. We'll take a short break now, but we have more news after this.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study. Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get your body. Tuesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. China and Panama are about to sign 20 agreements to cooperate in areas such as commerce, technology, and infrastructure. This is scheduled to take place during President Xi Jinping's first state visit to Panama on December 2nd and 3rd. The two countries established diplomatic relations after Panama broke off ties with Taiwan last June. The Barrio Blanco hydroelectric plant in Panama is harming the Nagable Bugle community, who now demand it be shut down and who demand that the government respect indigenous communities and their land.
This is the Barrio Blanco hydroelectric plant, which has caused water levels to rise, flooding the land of the Nagable Bugle community.
The government and plants administrators have imposed themselves on our people. The river is sacred to us. Our agriculture, our lives depend on the river. Our people live off it.
Flooding has damaged religious sites and has impacted the economy of the area.
There are nearly 15,000 people who have been affected by this plant.
But the resistance continues against the plant. In this makeshift camp, more and more people arrive to demand an end to it.
They are violating our rights. We want to live freely. We want our children to have good lives. But that is impossible now. We want to be respected.
While this project was all under the guise of developing the area, the people who live here are yet to benefit. These people not only live in poverty, but are marginalized and exploited.
Various social organizations in El Salvador have taken to the streets to demonstrate against water privatization. Their main goal is to demand that the National Assembly declares access to water as a human right. The demonstrators also visited the headquarters of various political parties, demanding laws that favor the environment. According to the United Nations, El Salvador has the highest level of environmental damage in the Americas after Haiti. A court in Guatemala has found a former soldier guilty of murdering hundreds of indigenous people during the dictatorship in the 1980s. It was one of the bloodiest massacres carried out by the army.
Santos Lopez is a former member of Guatemala's elite force known as Caiviles. He's been sentenced to over 5,000 years in prison for being responsible for the De las Dos Eres massacre in 1982.
For us, it's very satisfying to see this after horrible crimes against our country during the armed conflict. I believe that it's very good, not only on a personal level, but also for the families. I was a victim of it. 6 members of my family disappeared. My first son was one of them. This won't bring our relatives back, but I think it's necessary, so no more crimes against humanity happen again.
No nos devuelve, ¿verdad?, a nuestros seres queridos.
The tribunal held this retired military officer responsible for murdering 201 people and crimes against humanity, possibly the most brutal massacre the army perpetrated against indigenous people. A survivor told the judges about the details.
I was 11 years old when these men killed my family, people and children. I watched how they killed women. They also killed children one by one. So there were no survivors left.
Forensic research and statements from the families of the victims and survivors were given to the court for the sentence to be passed. This case has uncovered just how barbaric the army was.
They were executed by hitting them on the head with hammers. They broke their skulls and threw them to a pit. They also threw kids alive in there, and they shot men and threw grenades at them. I think that was the most shocking part. This community was erased from the map.
Dictator Efraín Ríos Montt should have been put on trial too, because the massacre took place under his administration. He died before he could be brought to justice.
30,000 police and military personnel will be patrolling the streets of Honduras to provide security during the Christmas season. The Army, Air Force, Navy, and the National Guard, Force Against Gangs actually, have been deployed in 18 regions. The extra officers will crack down on thieves who may try to take advantage of the busy shopping period. Honduras has been plagued with gang violence and drug trafficking. Thousands of women have marched in Chile's capital, Santiago, to protest gender violence. The demonstration comes just before the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women on Sunday. Women carried a huge 80-meter-long poster with the photographs and names of victims of femicide. They are demanding tougher measures against those who commit these crimes. At least 44 women were killed in Chile in 2018 by their partner.
Violence against women is violence that is expressed in multiple forms, every day, repeatedly to all of us, from the very young to the elderly.
Jail, mainly jail, and to have tough measures or even more tough against them, against misogynists.
The Caribbean launch of the 2018 theme for World AIDS Day took place at the CARICOM Secretariat in Guyana. It was also the launch of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, which begins December 1st. According to UN Women, 35% of women around the world have experienced some form of physical or sexual intimate partner violence or sexual violence by a non-partner. The Caribbean has one of the highest rape rates in the world, underscoring the need for awareness programs and targeted social programs to address the issue.
So the 16 Days of Activism takes into consideration November 25th, which is the International Day to End Violence Against Women and Girls, November 29, which is International Women Human Rights Defenders Day, World AIDS Day on December 1, and it ends on Human Rights Day on December 10. This year's theme for the entire 16 Days of Activism is Orange the World, #HearMeToo and violence against women and girls.
The government of Barbados is to cut the tax rate for local companies by almost 30%. It comes just after a month after the Prime Minister increased business taxes to boost the island's troubled public finances. Prime Minister Motley said the latest move was necessary to bring taxes on local companies in line with those of international businesses, as demanded by the OECD. However, she said she expected the Barbados business community to respond with greater investments. Dominica's opposition leader Lennox Linton and the former Prime Minister Edison James could be facing jail time. Both men are due to appear in court early next year on the charge of incitement. The charges are related to a riot and vandalism in the capital on February 7th of last year. If convicted, they both can face 15 years imprisonment. A bench warrant has also been issued for an opposition senator who failed to appear in court in connection with the incitement charges. And anti-corruption protests continue in Haiti. As a result, schools remain closed and the capital city's public transportation system has been paralyzed. On Wednesday, President Jovenel Moïse called for dialogue, but the opposition has rejected his request. In fact, the opposition has called for the protest to continue until Moïse resigns. We'll take a short break now, but we'll have more news in a minute.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. 25 people have been killed in Pakistan in a suicide attack in a market. A suicide bomber riding a motorcycle drove into a crowd at a festival that attracted people from different religious communities. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. And gunmen have killed at least 7 people in an attack on the Chinese consulate in the Pakistani city of Karachi. The 3 gunmen, 2 police officers, and 2 other unidentified victims are confirmed dead after armed attackers attempted to storm the building. An insurgent group has claimed responsibility for that attack.
All Chinese consular staff and family members in China's consulate in Pakistan are safe. Prime Minister Imran Khan had expressed condolences to the consulate. The Chinese side strongly condemns any violent attacks targeting any diplomatic missions and requests the Pakistani side takes measures to ensure the safety of Chinese nationals and organizations. China expresses condolences for the 2 dead Pakistani security officers as well as the families and those injured.
8 people have died after an armed attack on a French drilling company's site in southeastern Niger on Thursday. The assailants are believed to belong to the Nigerian jihadist group Boko Haram, which is active near the border with Nigeria. More than 500,000 civil servants in Tunisia walked off the job demanding higher wages. The state workers gathered in front of the parliament building, calling for the government to resign. Several public institutions nationwide were paralyzed by the strike, while only emergency services were provided at the hospitals. The International Monetary Fund is pressuring Tunisia's government to cut the public sector wage bill. A Central African Republic war crime suspect has appeared before the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands. Alfred Yakatom, known as Colonel Rambo, faces 14 charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity in the unrest between Christians and Muslims. He was arrested last month in the CAR and extradited to The Hague. During his court visit, his lawyer said Rambo was tortured while in detention before his transfer to The Hague. Protests against the fuel tax continue in France and have spread to Reunion Island. About 3,000 people have joined the protests on the 6th day of the Yellow Vest road blockades, which have seen outbreaks of violence. In Reunion, traffic was paralyzed on the main highways. One person was killed and over 400 others were hurt in clashes between drivers and demonstrators. And lawmakers in Sri Lanka, opposed to the disputed Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, have taken control of an important committee in the parliament. This is the latest twist in a month-long political crisis in the country. The Prime Minister has already lost 2 confidence votes in the parliament, with lawmakers electing to support his predecessor. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusenglish.net. Our viewers in Africa, we are on Starstat 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you for watching.